can fathom, more than I know. Your love is more than the highest heaven, more than forevermore, than my mind can fathom, more than I know. Your love is more than the highest heaven, more than forevermore.
Good morning. It's good to see everybody here this morning. Spring forward, or as Allison says, she doesn't spring forward. She crawls kicking and screaming. But she's here, which is evidence of the Holy Spirit, because I think her spirit's still in bed. But I see there are others who are here by the Holy Spirit as well. Some of the expressions on everyone's face. I love Dan Hall because he's very consistent. He missed class this morning, but there'll be an hour coming up soon where he'll show up on Fall Backwards. He and I are the only ones here in the parking lot at 8 o'clock in the morning, but he'll show up again too. He's very consistent about this. We're continuing through Genesis. Family reunions and big-time wrestling. This is a fascinating story. It's a bit of a long read, but I'll tell you, I try to edit these as much as possible, but I just couldn't edit this one. So we're going to read it. Stay with me. Jacob also went on his way, and the angels of God met him. When he saw them, he said, "This is the camp of God." So he named the place Mahanaim. Jacob sent messengers ahead of him to his brother Esau in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. God has told Jacob to go back, and so he's on his way back. "This is what you are to say to my master Esau. Your servant Jacob says, I have been staying with Laban, and I have remained there until now. I have cattle and donkeys and sheep and goats and men servants and maidservants. Now I am sending this message to my Lord, that I might find favor in your eyes." There's a little different spirit here. I don't know if you picked it up. He's calling Esau his master, and that he himself is his servant. He's got a little different attitude than the one he had when he left. When the messengers returned to Jacob, they said, "We went to your brother Esau, and now he is coming to meet you with 400 men." In great fear and distress, Jacob divided the people who were with him into two groups, the flocks and the herds and the camels as well. He thought, if Esau comes to attack one group, then the group that is left may escape. Then Jacob prayed, "O God, my father, the God of my father Abraham, the God of my father Isaac, O Yahweh, who said to me, 'Go back to your country and your relatives, and I will make you prosper.'" Sort of reminding God, you remember this is your fault, that I'm going back because you told me to. You said you'd take care of me. I am unworthy of all the kindness and faithfulness that you have shown to your servant. I had only my staff when I crossed this Jordan, but now I have become two groups. Save me, I pray, from the hand of my brother Esau, for I am afraid he will come and attack me, and also the mothers with their children. But you have said, "I will surely make you prosper. I will make your descendants like the sand of the sea, which cannot be counted." Sort of reminding God, you remember what you told me? Because my brother's coming with 400 men. So you remember all that stuff about sand of the sea, descendants, all that stuff. So he spent the night there, and from what he had with him, he selected the gift for his brother Esau: 200 female goats, 20 male goats, 200 ewes, 20 rams, 30 female camels and their young, 40 cows and 10 bulls, 20 female donkeys, 10 male donkeys. He put them in care of his servants, each a herd by itself, and said to his servants, "Go ahead of me and keep some space between the herds." He instructed the one in the lead, when my brother Esau meets you and asks, to whom do you belong and where are you going and who owns all these animals in front of you? Then you are to say, they belong to your servant Jacob. They are a gift sent to my lord Esau, and he is coming behind us. He also instructed the second and the third and all the others that followed the herds. You are to say the same thing to Esau when you meet him. And be sure to say, your servant Jacob is coming behind us, for he thought, I will pacify him with these gifts I am sending ahead. And later when I see him, perhaps he will receive me. So Jacob's gifts went on ahead of him, but he himself spent the night in the camp. That night Jacob got up and took his 2 wives and his 2 maidservants and his 11 sons and crossed the ford at Jabbok. After he had sent them across the stream, he sent over all of his possessions. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. When the man saw that he could not overpower him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip so that his hip was wrenched as he wrestled with the man. Then the man said, let me go, for it is daybreak. But Jacob replied, I will not let you go unless you bless me. He does have a thing about blessings, doesn't he? The man asked him, what is your name? He said, Jacob, he answered. Got to remember, Jacob means usurper, cutter in front of, someone that's kind of a shyster, always trying to get and pull a fast one, con man. What is your name? Jacob, he answered. Then the man said to him, your name will no longer be Jacob, but Israel, because you have struggled with God and with men and have overcome. And again, the translation of Israel is argued about. It's not really clear, but it has something to do with the fact that God is in charge and God protects. And so he wanted a blessing, and he's changed his name from someone who cuts in front of somebody, a usurper, to God protects. Jacob said, please tell me your name. But he replied, why do you ask my name? And this is a strange phrase. It doesn't translate really well. Some translations say, you know my name. This is a more literal translation, why do you ask my name? But the grammar used means you know the answer. And that's why saying you know my name, it's say, why would you ask my name? Because you already know it, is what's really being said here. And it's a very cryptic but also clear message. Why do you ask my name? Then he blessed him there. So Jacob called the place Peniel, saying, it is because I saw God face to face, and yet my life was spared. The sun rose above him as he passed Peniel, and he was limping because of his hip. Therefore, to this day, the Israelites do not eat the tendon attached to the socket of the hip, because the socket of Jacob's hip was touched near the tendon. Jacob looked up, and there was Esau coming with his 400 men, so he divided the children among Leah, Rachel, and the 2 maidservants. He put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children next, and Rachel and Joseph in the rear. He himself went on ahead and bowed down to the ground 7 times as he approached his brother. But Esau ran to meet Jacob, embraced him, threw his arms around his neck, and kissed him. And they went. Then Esau looked up and saw the women and children. He said, who are these with you? Jacob answered, they are the children God has graciously given your servant. Then the maidservant and their children approached and bowed down. Next, Leah and her children came and bowed down. Last of all, Joseph and Rachel. They too bowed down. Esau asked, what do you mean by all these droves I met? To find favor in your eyes, my lord, he said. But Esau said, I already have plenty, my brother. Keep what you have for yourself. No, please, Jacob said, if I have found favor in your eyes, accept this gift from me. For to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Interesting phrase. We'll look at that in a minute. Please accept this present that was brought for you, for God has been gracious to me, and I have all that I need. And because Jacob insisted, Esau accepted it. Then Esau said, let's be on our way. I'll accompany you. Strange story. You have Jacob going back to the land. He hasn't been there in 20 years. And there's a problem. He's been gone a while, but God's told him it's time to go back. He is the promised child. He's got the birthright. He's got the blessing. It's time to go back. He even sends angels to escort him, and I find it fascinating because he was on his way home, and Jacob saw angels coming at him, and, I think I would have been a little freaked out, but he's like, oh, this must be the camp of God. Look, the angels. I mean, it's like there's no problem. He sees angels all the time. He almost expects the angels. They come back there, but there's a remaining problem. I mean, he's got God, told him. He's got God's angels, but he's heading back, and there's his brother Esau, which is the reason he left, if you remember. Esau was saying, as soon as Dad dies, I love the way it said, he was consoling himself by saying, I'll kill Jacob as soon as Dad dies. That's a way to feel better. And so he's a little nervous, been 20 years, but he also knows all the stuff that he did. I mean, he extorted Esau's birthright. He stole his blessing. So the question was, would Esau leave Jacob in peace or in pieces? And he's not sure how his brother is going to feel when he gets back. And so he sends messengers ahead. I find it interesting. It says he was returning home when he sees the angels of God. Then he decides to send messengers ahead. Sort of like, okay, I've got the angels with me, so I might be okay. I'm going to send messengers ahead. But then they bring him back the message, he's coming to meet you with 400 men. Now, are they friendly men? Or are they not friendly men? That's the question. It seems like a rather large entourage for a couple of brothers to just be getting together and seeing each other after 20 years. I mean, how would you feel? What would you think? More importantly, what would you do? You got to remember the state of mind he was in when he left. And it's funny how when you leave, like a place like that, and you haven't been there in 20 years, you assume things are the same way they were. And so he's, I'd say, justifiably worried about heading back. See, in the past, he's always been sneaky and clever. He's always been able to outsmart his opponents, outmaneuver the opponents. He's made his sort of way of life like that. That's his personality. That was his name. He can make plans. But now that he knows what he knows and he knows who's waiting for him, he prays. He knows his plans may not work, so he figures he better get some outside help. And he prays to the God of Abraham and to the God of Isaac, and who will become and is the God of Jacob. He recognizes, and I do think it's interesting because he talks to God like, I know you've given me all this stuff, and in fact, I know I didn't deserve it. When I crossed the Jordan, all I had was a stick in my hand. And now I'm returning, and I've got wives and children and servants and cattle and donkeys and sheep and goats. I mean, he recognizes God has blessed him. But it's interesting. I don't know if you've ever had those times where God has blessed you. God has protected you. God is with you. But suddenly you face a new danger out front and you wonder, can God handle this one? Which, if we step back, we realize, he's God. He can take care of anything he wants to. But it's amazing how when we're in the midst of life, that we look at our past and we see all that God has done for us, but we face a new threat from the front, and all of a sudden I don't know, can God take care of this one? It doesn't make any sense, but it's very human. That suddenly we find ourselves in a new situation and we wonder now, is this where I step out? It gets a little much for God. And here, even with all that Jacob has experienced of God, a little nervous. Lets God know, I know you've given me all this stuff. I know I was empty. handed when I came, but I'm facing my brother Esau, and I may need a little more help. He also knows there's nowhere else to turn. God is his only chance. He begins to recognize that without God helping, all of his plans are worthless. Without God intervening, our schemes, our cleverness, our intelligence doesn't amount to much. And then we come on to this wrestling with God. So Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. It's one of those bizarre little phrases. I mean, that's, there's no, you don't hear the music, and the lights dimmed. It was a dark, stormy night, and it's just, Jacob was left alone in the camp, and a man wrestled with him till daybreak. Doesn't explain why, where he came from, how he got there, what was the purpose. Just a man, which turns out to be God, wrestled with him till daybreak. And it's a bizarre encounter. And yet, is it? I mean, let me ask the question, have you ever wrestled with God? I don't know about you, but I've wrestled with God a lot. And God doesn't seem to mind. But I've had my own wrestling matches with the Lord. And he'll engage. And in fact, it's irritating sometimes. Because, you think you've got it all worked out, and there's that nagging voice. You know what I'm talking about. And you think, oh, that's just my conscience, or oh, that's just this, or and people come into my office all the time, and I don't know why, but I just keep asking. I'm saying, that's God. God's wrestling with you. He's engaging you. If something's bothering you, it's probably God. That's why he gives us the Holy Spirit. That's why he sends us his messengers. That's why he'll engage us. Because he wants us to become better people. And if we think we're doing it ourselves, if we think we can handle this, if we think I got this, he likes to wrestle with us and let us know, no, you don't. You need my help. Apparently they struggle all night. It even looks like Jacob somehow manages to wrestle better than the man, or at least they fight to an even draw, and God touches his hip and cripples him. But apparently Jacob still hangs on. And God says, it's getting light. You got to let me go. There's other things going on in the world I need to take care of. And Jacob won't let him go until he gets blessed. He wants a blessing. And he knows he's got a hold of someone who can give it to him. Now, I find that fascinating. And yet we all pray for God's blessings. In fact, we know he's the only one who can really give us what we need. We talked about how our basic needs are security and significance, and yet those can only truly come from God. We try to get them from everywhere else, but those can only come from God. Being blessed with good relationships, being blessed with what we call a good life, but a good life means good relationships with our fellow man and with God. Two greatest commands. Love God, love your neighbor. That all the things in the world don't really help us. All the fame and the glory. We've seen all these great stories about people who are famous and they're rich and they commit suicide. Because they realize all of that really doesn't mean anything. The only real blessing can come from God, not from the world. And so he does bless Jacob, and he cripples him. Don't you find that a little strange? That Jacob wins, but he loses. He gains a whole new identity and a new limp. Kind of mixed blessings, I would say. That he sort of wins, but he loses at the same time. And that's kind of how it is with God. I mean, you might gain a new identity, you might gain a new understanding, but in that process, you're going to be humbled. I'm going to be humbled. When we get close to God, we get humbled. And one of the best indicators on how close to God someone is how humble they are. You always wonder about the guy that lets you know how close to God he is. Oh, me and God are tight. You might wonder about that. Because when you get close to God, it's an incredibly humbling, often humiliating experience. But you come away feeling pretty good. You come away winning because you've lost. And that's what Jesus says, isn't it? If you want to gain your life, you've got to lose it. You want to be the greatest, you've got to become the servant. That the kingdom we work in is an upside-down kingdom. It's not a worldly one. And it doesn't go by worldly standards. We talked about that a little in class this morning. Jacob was certainly changed forever by being assaulted by God. And again, I've had that feeling. You know, some of my encounters with God, you always think, oh, I've had some time with God and it's great. I've had some times with God where it's not great. It's pretty humiliating. It's pretty miserable. Where he kind of shines that light into those dark places you didn't really want to deal with right now. I'm always amazed at how just, if I'm working on something, a character flaw or a particular sin that I'm struggling with or some pride, and I finally, I love that, I feel so good, so proud of myself when I get over a prideful area. And God puts the light right on that. And I don't feel so proud anymore. That he often, just sort of remind you, I conquer one sin, I'm like, isn't that great, God? And yeah, well, let's work on this one now. There's always a winning and a losing in the process. But he's always there. And you always come away better. He saw the face of God and didn't die. That was very common theology. It even states that in the Old Testament. They had this idea that if you see God, you would just drop dead on the spot. And you see this as we go through the Old Testament. And lots of different people would meet an angel or meet God, and they would not die. And that was exciting. I don't know what it says about someone when you're like, hey, I met them, I talked to them, and I didn't die. But that's, when you're in the presence of God, that's a possibility. He is that awesome. He is that incredible. And yet we also know that God can take a human form and walk among us. And then we get to this other thing. You see, there's this thing where Jacob's going back, but there's two stories going on here, but I would argue, no, there's not. Jacob's going back. He's about to meet Esau, and he meets God first, and then Esau. And he makes this statement, for to see your face is like seeing the face of God, now that you have received me favorably. Have you ever wondered about that? That's an unusual statement. And you would, he just wrestled with God the night before, so I would think seeing Esau would be a little different than whatever he was seeing the night before. He would have remembered what God looked like. And he says, to see your face is like seeing the face of God. That's a strange statement. So what does it mean? You ever thought about that? Or is that one of those verses you just read over? I do that all the time. Suddenly a verse jumps out as you read 100 times, and I remember reading through this thinking, well, that's unusual. He hasn't seen his brother in 20 years, and when he sees him, he says, seeing your face is like seeing the face of God after he just encountered God. I think this has to do with what was he expecting? What was Jacob expecting when he saw his brother Esau? He was expecting it would not be a pleasant interchange. He expected he would be injured in a great battle, maybe killed, maybe his wives and children killed. He was going back with great fear and trembling. That's what he expected from his brother. But what did he get? As soon as his brother saw him, he ran to him, he hugged him, he kissed him. It's amazing what 20 years of maturing can do for somebody, as well as 20 years of walking with God. He may have still been angry with his brother Jacob, but the man he met was a new man, a different man, a man named Israel, protected by God, a man with a limp, and a man who kept calling him my Lord and calling himself his servant. It was a different guy than the one who had fled 20 years earlier. And I hope after 20 years all of us would be a little more humble, a little more gracious, especially after walking with God. He knew he deserved wrath and vengeance. What he got was forgiveness. What he got was reconciliation. And I think that's exactly what he meant when he said, to see your face like this, to be forgiven after all he'd done. That was seeing the face of God. Being reconciled is seeing the face of God. It's often said, to err is human, to forgive is divine. And that's definitely one of those sayings we have. Everyone seems to know it, but I think the older I get, the more I read and understand, the more I think that's exactly right. To err is human, to be angry is human, to hold a grudge is very human. To forgive is divine. When we forgive, we are reflecting our Creator. When we reconcile relationships instead of continue the bitterness, we are allowing God to take over. We are not acting in a human fashion. We are displaying the face of God. So where's the gospel in this story? Paul says, for 2 Corinthians chapter 5, so from now on we regard no one from a worldly point of view. Though we are regarded Christ in this way, we do so no longer. Therefore, if anyone is in Christ, he is a new creation. The old is gone. The new has come. All this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting men's sins against them. And he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. Now, one of the commentators I read said, I don't know if Paul had Jacob's story in mind, but he could have. Forgetting the sins of the past, Esau forgave his brother, forgave him the sins, and was reconciled. Because Jacob was a new man. He was now Israel, a name that would stick with those people, God's people, throughout the ages. That once again, as they came together, something divine happened. We read in Matthew 18 where it says, where two or three are gathered in my name, and we've talked about that, how that gathering is not necessarily an assembly for worship, but it's people coming together for reconciliation, to put together broken relationships. That when we reconcile, when we get over the bitterness, when we put the grudges away, we show the face of God. And that when two or three of us get together for that purpose, it's so awesome, it's so godly that God himself shows up. And when two or three are gathered together in my name for reconciliation, for forgiveness, I'll be there. In fact, I have to be there. It's who I am. And it's who we are if we're going to reflect our Father. Jacob became Israel, God's man, and therefore carried out God's plan of reconciliation, starting with his brother. And we need to get that. I'm always fascinated with people who seem to understand and employ Christian ethics and values in their lives with everyone else and not their own family. That somehow we've got God's grace and God's forgiveness, and and God's mercy for everyone else except people closest to us. And that if we're in fact going to reflect our Father, it has to start with the people closest to us. And the fact of the matter is we have the strongest feelings about the people closest to us. And sometimes those strong feelings are positive, and sometimes they're not. And that if we truly want to reflect God, we have to reflect God's mercy, grace, and forgiveness with our spouses, with our children, with our parents, with our siblings. Walking around carrying those grudges is not what God intended for us to do. And as I mentioned before, when we hold on to bitterness towards one person, that bitterness tends to infect all of our other relationships. We need to start reconciling. You see, that's why God put us here. I think that's what I love about that little phrase where he said, to see your face is to see the face of God, is that when we can truly forgive each other, we can show the face of God to our spouses, our parents, our children, our siblings. And that's the whole point of the ministry of reconciliation. And so when people look at us, they'll see God. So I too want to encourage you to pick up those cards on the way out and show God's face. Show God's face to the world around us, starting at home and extending it outwards. This week, take up that ministry of reconciliation. And we'll see this ministry of reconciliation all through the Old Testament coming up in just a few chapters. If you have any needs this morning, please come as we stand and sing.
I love the Lord Messiah deep down in my heart. I love the Lord Messiah deep down in my heart. Deep, deep, and it's a down, down. Deep down in my heart. Deep, deep, and it's a down, down. Deep down in my heart. I love to sing his praises deep down in my heart. I love to sing his praises deep down in my heart. Deep, deep, and it's a down, down, deep down in my heart. Deep, deep, and it's a down, down, deep down in my heart. Love my Christian family deep down in my heart. I love my Christian family.